As a 31-year-old insurance agent, my weekdays are consumed by the relentless grind of claims, policies, and client calls that stretch into the evening. By the time the weekend arrives, I crave an escape, a way to disconnect from the chaos of my professional life. That's when I turn to yard sales, those treasure troves of forgotten relics scattered across suburban lawns. There's something grounding about sifting through someone else's discarded possessions, old books with dog-eared pages, chipped mugs that once held someone's morning coffee, or tools worn smooth by years of use. Each item feels like a fragment of a story, waiting for someone like me to give it a new chapter. One crisp Saturday morning in early autumn, I was cruising through a quiet neighborhood near my home in a small Midwestern town. The air was sharp with the scent of fallen leaves, and the streets were alive with the hum of weekend activity. A faded cardboard sign tacked to a telephone pole caught my eye. Yard sale this way was the kind of impulsive detour. I lived for the promise of a hidden gem tucked among the clutter. I pulled over, my sedan crunching against the gravel shoulder, and followed the arrow to a modest ranch-style house with a sagging porch and a patchy lawn. A folding table dominated the driveway, its surface cluttered with the usual yard sale fare. Stacks of paperbacks, mismatched kitchen gadgets, and a tangle of extension cords. But it was the collection of tools that drew me in: a rusted hacksaw, a dented wrench, and, most strikingly, a vintage red metal toolbox that seemed to glow with nostalgia. It was the kind of toolbox my grandfather kept in his garage, its surface pitted and scarred, carrying the faint scent of motor oil and sawdust. I ran my fingers over its cool, weathered surface, picturing him tinkering on his old Chevy, his hands steady and sure. Inside, the toolbox held a modest assortment: a couple of wrenches, a few screwdrivers with cracked handles, and a hammer with a worn wooden grip. Nothing extraordinary, but it felt like a piece of my childhood, a tangible link to simpler times. "How much for this?" I asked, holding up the toolbox. The man running the sale, a weathered figure in his 60s with deep-set eyes and a flannel shirt, glanced over with a shrug. $10, he said, his voice flat, as if the transaction was a mere formality. I handed over the cash, and we exchanged a few words about the decline of quality craftsmanship, how they don't make tools like they used to. With the toolbox tucked under my arm, I drove home, satisfied with my find and eager to clean it up for my own collection. For a week, the toolbox sat untouched in my garage, buried under the mental clutter of work deadlines and grocery lists. It wasn't until a quiet evening, as I lingered over a plate of leftover pasta, that I remembered it. The doorbell's sharp chime interrupted my thoughts, startling me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A stranger stood on my porch, wiry man in his late 40s, his brown hair cropped short, his face etched with lines that spoke of a hard life. His presence wasn't overtly threatening, but there was a weight to it, a subtle menace that made my skin prickle. "Can I help you?" I asked, cracking the door open just enough to maintain a barrier. His voice was low, gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in hours. "You bought a toolbox at a yard sale last week, right?" I blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. Why? "It's mine," he said, leaning closer, his eyes narrowing. "It got sold by mistake. I need it back." The words hit me like a cold splash of water. The man at the yard sale hadn't mentioned anything about a mistake, and I'd paid for the toolbox, fair and square. My instincts screamed that something was off, but I kept my tone polite. "I'm sorry, but I bought it from the owner." "Are you sure it's the same one?" "It's the same one," he snapped, his voice edged with impatience. "Look, I don't want trouble. I just need my toolbox back." I hesitated, my mind racing. The way he stood, the intensity in his gaze, it felt like there was more at stake than a rusty old toolbox. "I'm sorry," I I said, firmer now, but I bought it legally. If there's an issue, maybe you should talk to the guy who sold it. He stared at me, his jaw tight, then gave a curt nod. All right, he said, turning to leave. But I'll be back. True to his word, he returned 2 days later. I was sprawled on the couch, half watching a sitcom, when the doorbell rang. Again, through the peephole, I saw him, more agitated this time, his hands clenched into fists. Hey, he shouted, pounding on the door. I know you're in there. Just give me the toolbox, and I'll leave you alone. I stayed silent, my pulse quickening. His tone wasn't just desperate, it was unhinged, like a man teetering on the edge of control. After a few minutes of pacing and muttering, he left, but not before trying the doorknob. My stomach lurched as I realized I hadn't locked it. I bolted it shut, my hands trembling, and called a friend for advice. Dude, this guy's unhinged, my friend said over the phone. You need to call the cops. I hesitated. He hadn't broken any laws yet. I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily, but the encounters grew more frequent, more intense. He'd show up at odd hours, his knocks growing louder, his demands more insistent. One night, I heard him try the doorknob again, and the sound sent a chill through me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was a Thursday night, around 10 p.m., when the situation came to a head. I was washing dishes, the clink of plates mingling with the hum of the radio, when the pounding started hard, deliberate, like someone trying to break the door down. Open the door, he yelled, his voice raw with anger. I know you're in there. My heart slammed against my ribs as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I'm calling the police. I shouted through the door, clutching a kitchen knife. For reassurance, you need to leave. For a moment, there was silence, followed by a low mutter I couldn't make out. Then, the sound of retreating footsteps. I stayed on the line with the operator until a patrol car pulled into my driveway, its lights casting eerie shadows across the lawn. I explained everything to the officer, a young woman with a calm, professional demeanor. Do you know this guy? She asked, jotting notes on a pad. No, I said, still shaken. He's been coming around for a week, saying the toolbox I bought belongs to him. She nodded, her expression unreadable. We'll file a report and keep an eye out. If he comes back, don't hesitate to call. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the toolbox. Why was it so important to him? Was it sentimental? Valuable? I decided to take a closer look. In the garage, under the harsh glow of a work light, I opened the toolbox and sifted through its contents. The tools were unremarkable, rusted, well used, nothing special. But as I ran my hands along the interior, I noticed something odd. The bottom felt uneven, like it was hiding a compartment. With a screwdriver, I pried open a false panel, revealing a hidden space beneath Dot. Inside were several small plastic bags filled with a white powder. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces fell into place. Drugs. This wasn't about nostalgia or a family heirloom. He was after his stash. The realization hit me like a punch, and I felt a wave of nausea. I'd been carrying around a ticking time bomb, oblivious to the danger it held. The next morning, I drove straight to the police station, the toolbox rattling in my trunk. I explained everything to the officer on duty, a grizzled veteran who took the bags with a grim nod. You did the right thing, he said. We'll look into it, but I'd recommend being extra cautious for a while. If this guy knows you, had his stash, he might not give up easily. I tried to resume my routine work, errands, the mundane rhythm of life, but the officer's warning lingered. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, a sense of dread washed over me. The porch light, which I always left on, was dark. The front door hung open, its lock shattered, the frame splintered. My heart pounded as I dialed 911 again, staying on the line as I stepped cautiously inside. The house was a war zone. Cushions were torn from the couch, books swept off shelves, papers strewn across the floor. The kitchen was worse, cabinet doors yanked open, dishes smashed, even the fridges. Contents dumped onto the counter. As I moved toward the bedrooms, I heard footsteps, quick, heavy, retreating through the back door. Peering out, I caught a glimpse of two figures sprinting across the yard, vanishing into the shadows beyond my fence. I froze, torn between fear and the urge to chase them, but I stayed put. Waiting for the police, when the officers arrived, I described the scene. Though I hadn't gotten a clear look at the intruders. "Do you think they'll come back?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's possible," one officer admitted. "But now that they know the toolbox isn't here, they might move on. We'll increase patrols, but get new locks and consider a security system." I followed their advice, replacing the locks and installing cameras, but the violation lingered. Home, once a sanctuary, felt tainted. I stayed with a friend for a few days, jumping at every noise, scanning every street for unfamiliar faces. The police never caught the man or his accomplices, and I was left with a lingering paranoia that clung to me like damp clothes. Yard sales, once a source of joy, now felt like a gamble. What had started as a nostalgic impulse had spiraled into a nightmare, a reminder that even the most innocent purchases can carry a hidden cost. As a tech analyst, I spend my days immersed in cutting-edge systems, debugging code, and navigating the digital world. But at home, I'm a bit of a Luddite. My weekends are reserved for analog pleasures, spinning vinyl records, tinkering with retro game consoles, and, yes, watching movies on a clunky old VCR. There's a ritualistic comfort in the soft whir of a rewinding tape, the grainy flicker of a film from my childhood. So when I spotted a yard sale a few houses down from mine, hosted by a family moving out of the neighborhood, I couldn't resist. The sale was modest. A few tables cluttered with knickknacks, chipped mugs, dog-eared novels, and a box of VHS tapes, priced at $5. The man overseeing the sale lounged in a lawn chair, sipping iced tea, his expression one of mild disinterest. I rifled through the tapes, grinning at titles like E.T., The Goonies, and Back to the Future classics that promised a nostalgic weekend. But buried at the bottom was an unmarked black tape, its label peeled off, leaving only a sticky residue. It intrigued me, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Was it a bootleg concert? A forgotten home movie? I tossed the box into my trunk, eager to find out. That night, I sorted through the tapes, saving the unmarked one for last. Popped it into the VCR, grabbed a beer, and settled onto the couch, expecting something quirky or amusing. The screen flickered with static before resolving into a grainy image. Like a home video shot on an old camcorder from the 80s, a family appeared, a man, a woman, and two kids sitting in a cozy living room, laughing over a bowl of popcorn. The audio was muffled, but their joy was palpable. A snapshot of domestic bliss. At first, I smiled, charmed by the ordinariness of it. But as the footage played, a nagging sense of familiarity crept in. The room's layout: the couch against the far wall, the chipped fireplace mantel. The alcove where I kept my bookshelf, it was identical to my living room. My heart skipped a beat. I leaned closer, squinting at the faded floral wallpaper, the same pattern I'd planned to replace since moving in. This was my house. I paused the tape, my mind racing. The house was built in the late 80s, and I'd bought it 5 years ago from an older couple who'd lived here for decades. Could this be footage of them? But the family on the tape was younger, the parents in their 30s, the kids maybe 8 or 9. I didn't recall any mention of children when I'd toured the house. Shaking off the unease, I told myself it was a coincidence, maybe a previous owner. I hit play, determined to see it through. The mood in the video shifted. The family's laughter faded, replaced by tense glances and nervous fidgeting. The kids kept looking toward the edge of the frame, their eyes wide with unease. The parents exchanged hushed words, the woman pulling the children closer. Shadows moved on the far wall, elongated and unnatural, as if cast by something or someone not in the room. My stomach twisted as the camera panned slightly, revealing the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The kids pointed toward it there. Faces pale, but the woman shook her head, her grip tightening. The footage grew distorted, static crackling across the screen. Faint whispers emerged from the background, unintelligible but chilling. The family's fear was palpable now. There, eyes locked on the hallway. The camera jolted as if dropped, and the screen filled with static. When the image returned, it was angled at the floor, showing the family's feet. The whispers grew louder, mingled with the sound of muffled sobbing. Then came a heavy thud, like footsteps, just off screen. The tape cut to black. I sat frozen. My beer forgotten, my heart pounding. My rational mind insisted it was a prank, a staged performance, but the fear in their faces felt too raw, too real. I ejected the tape and set it aside, telling myself I'd revisit it later. But sleep eluded me. The image of that family staring into the darkness burned into my mind. The next morning, I watched the tape again, hoping daylight would strip away its menace. I've studied every detail. The calendar on the wall, dated nearly 30 years ago. The family's growing panic. The shadow that briefly crossed the frame, tall and angular, like a void in the light. Each viewing made it harder to dismiss. Desperate for answers, I approached a neighbor who'd lived on the street for decades. Over coffee, I asked about the house's previous owners. Her face tightened, her voice low. "I don't like talking about it," she said. "The family that lived there before the older couple, they left suddenly. Something about the house didn't sit right with them. They abandoned most of their stuff, like they were in a hurry. The place sat empty for years before it was sold." I pressed for more, but she clammed up, her unease palpable. I didn't push further. The tape went back into its box, and the box went into the attic, where it remains. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I swear I hear faint whispers, like those on the tape, echoing from the hallway. I tell myself it's just the house settling, but deep down, I wonder what happened to that family and what they saw in the darkness. Yard sales are my therapy, a way to unwind from the stress of my job as a marketing coordinator. There's a thrill in the hunt, in finding a hidden gem among the clutter, a chipped teacup with a story, a book with handwritten notes in the margins, or a piece of furniture that could transform a room. One Saturday, I set out for a community-wide yard sale in a nearby neighborhood. My coffee steaming in the queue folder, the morning sun casting long shadows across the streets. The sale was a sprawl of tables and tarps, each one overflowing with treasures and trash. I wandered through the chaos, my eyes scanning for something special. At the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a lone setup caught my attention, its sign proclaiming antiques and vintage finds. A massive oak tree shaded the display, where old cameras, silverware, and a vintage typewriter gleamed with potential. But it was a tall mirror that stopped me in my tracks. Its gilded frame, carved with vines and flowers, was tarnished but elegant. The glass slightly warped, giving it an antique charm. I could already see it in my living room, catching the golden glow of afternoon light. The vendor, a wiry man in his late 50s with piercing blue eyes, approached as I studied the mirror. Admiring it, he asked, his voice smooth but tinged with something I couldn't place caution. "Perhaps." "It's beautiful," I said, tracing the frame's intricate carvings. "How much?" He hesitated, his hand resting on the mirror's edge as if reluctant to let it go. "It's special. Been in my family for generations. Are you sure it's what you're looking for?" His reluctance was odd. Most vendors were eager to haggle, but I brushed it off. "I'm sure. It'll look perfect in my living room." He sighed, almost regretfully. "All right, but it's heavy. Let me deliver it to your house." I could have fitted in my car, but his insistence, coupled with my desire to avoid conflict, won out. Against my better judgment, I gave him my address. Hours later, his battered pickup truck rumbled into my driveway. He carried the mirror inside alone, waving off my offer to help, and positioned it against the living room wall with a reverence that unsettled me. "It looks good here," he said, his eyes lingering on the room's details. "Take care of it." "Thank you," I replied, but his gaze felt intrusive, like he was cataloging my home. He left reluctantly, and I locked the door, a strange relief washing over me that evening. The mirror was everything I'd hoped, Tit's golden frame catching the lamplight, adding warmth to the room. But as night fell, a faint unease settled in my chest, like the air had grown heavier. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and went to bed, the mirror's reflection glinting in the corner of my eye. The next morning, as I grabbed the mail, I noticed an old blue sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows obscuring the driver. I didn't think much of it until it was still there that afternoon. Peering out, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By evening, the car remained, and through the dusk, I caught the silhouette of a man inside. My unease grew, but I told myself it was a coincidence. Days passed, and the sedan became a fixture, parked for hours at a time. By the fourth day, it was closer, right at my curb. I caught a glimpse of the driver, the vendor from the yard sale, his eyes fixed on my house. My heart raced. Why was he here? I decided to confront him, my nerves jangling as I stepped onto the porch. But as I reached the sidewalk, he started the car and sped off, leaving me trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house amplifying my paranoia. The mirror, once a prized find, now felt like an intruder. I moved it to the garage, covering it with a sheet, hoping distance would ease my nerves. But the sedan returned the next evening, parked in my driveway this time. I watched through the curtains as the man stepped out, pacing along the sidewalk, his gaze darting to my windows. Panicking, I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the man fled, his car vanishing into the night. The police took a report, promising to track him down, but he never returned. I brought the mirror back to the living room, hoping to reclaim my space, but its presence still felt wrong, like it carried a piece of him. I haven't decided whether to keep it or sell it, but every time I pass it, I feel a pang of dread. Yard sales, once a source of joy, now feel like a gamble. A reminder that some treasures come with shadows we can't shake. Vintage furniture has always been my weakness. The scratches, the faded varnish, the stories etched into every imperfection there, like love letters from the past. So when I spotted a rocking chair at a yard sale in my neighborhood, I was smitten. Its dark wood was carved with delicate vines and leaves, the seat worn but sturdy, promising to be the perfect addition to my living room. I could already see it by the bay window, a cozy nook for reading or sipping tea. "How much for the chair?" I asked, running my hand along its smooth armrest. The woman running the sale, middle-aged figure with a distracted air, barely glanced up. $20, she muttered, her tone clipped, as if eager to be rid of it. "Is it an antique?" I pressed, curious about its history. "It's old," she said, shrugging. "You want it or not?" Her dismissiveness raised a red flag, but I brushed it aside, handing over the cash and loading the chair into my car. At home, I spent the afternoon arranging it by the window, draping a soft throw blanket over its back and placing a rug beneath. It looked perfect, like it had always belonged there. That evening, I settled into the chair with a book and a cup of tea, the gentle creak of the wood soothing my nerves. But around 11 p.m., as I lay in bed, a faint sound drifted from the living room, rhythmic, creaking, like someone rocking back and forth. I froze, listening. It stopped after a moment, and I told myself it was the house settling. Though my pulse refused to slow, the creaking became a nightly ritual, sometimes faint, sometimes loud, as if someone were pushing the chair with force. I avoided the living room after dark, retreating to my bedroom with the door closed. One morning, I noticed the chair had shifted slightly, angled toward the window. I lived alone, no one could have moved it. I shoved it back into place, my unease growing. Determined to understand, I sat in the chair one evening, rocking gently to test its mechanics. Nothing seemed amiss. Before bed, I placed a piece of tape under one leg, marking its position. At 2 a.m., I woke to violent creaking, the sound of wood straining. Heart pounding, I ran to the living room. The chair was rocking furiously, the blanket slipping to the floor. "Stop it," I shouted, my voice trembling. The chair stopped abruptly, the silence deafening. The tape mark confirmed it had moved. Several inches. The next night, a new sound joined the creaking faint whispers, low and unintelligible, coming from the living room. I inched toward the doorway, my breath shallow, but the whispers stopped as I approached. I called my friend Anna, who arrived skeptical but supportive. As we sat on the couch, the creaking started again. Anna's eyes widened. "Kay," she whispered, "that's not normal." 2 nights later, I slept in the living room, hoping my presence would deter whatever was happening. At 3 a.m., a loud bang jolted me awake. The chair was slamming against the wall, rocking with relentless force. I grabbed my keys and fled, spending the night in my car. The next morning, I dragged the chair to the curb with a free sign. By evening, it was gone. The living room felt empty, but not peaceful. For weeks, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd brought something into my home with that chair. Now, when I see vintage furniture, I hesitate. Some treasures carry burdens too heavy to bear.